This is a very interesting time in global finance because certainly there are many factors that should be reducing the importance of the dollar. The US political system has certain problems. If you look at the amount of debt issued by the US government, it's more than 125% of GDP. It's about $33 trillion. It's the highest level as a share of GDP, even higher than in the post-war period when the US issued a lot of debt. So the US dollar should be a lot weaker, but the reality is quite different. Certainly there are attempts by issuers of other currencies, including the Chinese renminbi, to get those currencies to be more important in international payments. Now that China has the cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, it can more directly communicate with the payment system, say, of India, Russia, Brazil, other emerging market currencies. So you can more directly trade between the Chinese renminbi and the Indian rupee, or the Chinese renminbi and the Brazilian real, without having to go to the dollar. But what is interesting is that a lot of this activity has pushed payments activity away from the euro, the Japanese yen, and the pound sterling, while the dollar still remains quite important. Similarly, as a reserve currency, the renminbi has started playing a more prominent role in international finance. It accounts for about 2.5% of global reserves. The dollar share has shrunk a little bit in the last 5 or 6 years, from about 62 to 59%, but the shares of the euro have shrunk even more. So the distance between the dollar and all the other currencies has, if anything, increased a little bit. So unfortunately, while I think much of the world would like to shift away from the dollar, it's not clear that there is an obvious alternative that can take the place of the dollar.
Meanwhile, how to avoid countries with probably the biggest reserve currencies in the world to use the currency as a currency weapon, quote unquote?
So in the US, there is a recognition that the primacy of the dollar does give the US some geopolitical power, but it's not all good for the US, because at times of difficulty, a lot of money flows into the US, and even in normal times, there is a lot of money flowing into the US that keeps the dollar at a relatively high level compared to other currencies, and that affects US export competitiveness. For instance, it's seen as affecting US job growth, in particular in the sectors that could potentially export a lot more to the rest of the world. So it's not a full positive for the US, but certainly in the US there are lots of discussions about how the high and rising level of debt might have negative effects on the dollar and, of course, on the US economy more broadly. But unfortunately, right now, there doesn't seem to be the political will to take the really difficult steps that are necessary to control the growth in the US fiscal deficit and therefore in the US federal debt. And given that the US still remains the largest economy in the world, to get its policies right is really important for the US, but also for the rest of the world.